We help any individual consumer brand set up a reinforcement learning agent that will be able to optimize marketing for them. So imagine there's one marketer for every consumer in the customer database. That's how the reinforcement learning agent operates. And it has access to every past action every customer has taken. So it learns on all customer history. It'll look at all past actions that individual consumer has taken. And then lastly, it has available to it all possible campaigns that it can run. So from the email system, the SMS system, and the push notification system, it'll see all the copy and creative that is available and determine, based on all past actions, what is the best campaign to show this customer to optimize towards an outcome.
Why is using RL for these marketing agents the right paradigm?
RL is uniquely suited because it's very good at understanding a sequence of events, both historical and future, that relates to a goal state. So marketers almost always want to optimize towards one thing, right? Which is LTV. How much transaction volume am I getting from this individual customer? LTV is not linear. It's not like I just want to increase conversion on this funnel. It's actually, I might want to get you to do many intermediate actions or show you many intermediate campaigns up until the point where you get to a goal state. And that goal state is a transaction state. So RL does a really good job of optimizing not just getting to the goal right now, but getting to the goal eventually through intermediate states.
Hey, Kashish. I'm so excited to have you on. The state of marketing is changing so much with AI. The state of data is changing so much with AI. We're going to get into all of it. But first, thanks for coming on. I think it will help to hear a little bit about you. You and actually your co-founders all have such interesting origin stories. So just tell me a little bit about what led you to entrepreneurship.
Sure thing, yeah. So I guess I did my machine learning master's at Penn. Graduated, I was supposed to be a venture capitalist, but at the time I really wanted to live in San Francisco. And so I decided to move here. And that's when I started my first business. At the same time, I met my co-founders, Tatus and Josh, through a group house that we lived in. And they were both working at a company called Segment. And Segment's in a pretty similar space as where we are today. They also do like data-driven marketing. And we kind of just became friends first, eventually started working together, and then pivoted the business into what it is today, which is now called Hightouch.
And you guys have been through a lot together, including many pivots in the business. So tell me a little bit about how you arrived at Composable CDP, which is, if I had to use one tagline for Hightouch today, it would be that. Feel free to push back on it. How did you get to Composable CDP and what is that?
Yeah, sure. So how we got here is when we were talking to some of the largest like B2C companies in the world in 2020, we learned that they were actually doing a pretty good job of centralizing their data in cloud data warehouses. And that the typical CDP paradigm, things like Segment and traditional CDPs didn't make sense anymore because you now have a cloud data warehouse where you can actually operate your customer 360 out of. And so what we built was marketing layers on top of data warehouses. Originally, that was the original business. And we would give marketers access to the data they already had to use for marketing. So you'd log into our UI, you get like a segmentation builder, and then you'd be able to run all your emails and ads off that segmentation builder. Then we built a journey builder. So you log into our UI, you get journeys, and then you run your campaigns. And it powers marketing for pretty large brands like PetSmart, like Spotify, Weight Watchers, Warner Music, and so on. And that was the original business back in 2020.
Was that something that folks were bought in? They said, yeah, we have all this data in the data warehouse. We want to use it. Give us a composable CDP. Or because it's such a different paradigm than CDPs in the past, did it require a lot of market education?
It did require a lot of education. It was interesting because everyone we talked to would agree fundamentally that this was the future. They were in varying states of data maturity to be able to actually build that future. But conceptually, they all really agreed. And that was pretty cool because you'd see people talking about composable CDP or like reverse ETL, getting data back out of data warehouses into SaaS tools, more from a philosophical level versus should I buy this SaaS or not buy this SaaS?
Yep. Like, this is a nice idea because data democratization is good, but we haven't actually implemented all the things that we need to do to get that ready.
And then I think people were very surprised to find out that it was actually more simple to implement composable than it was to like outsource your data to a vendor. Because it seems more complex, it seems more like the future state, but actually in practice, every single client that we've worked with has found that it actually is much easier.
How do you bridge that gap in terms of market education and showing them that it is easier relative to their expectations?
I think a couple ways. Like in the early days, we built a semantic layer. And that semantic layer really gave people conviction that we could actually build SQL queries for them that would always work. and propagate them down to the warehouse and get back like good results. So there's all these like more technology related things that we did in order to give our customers conviction that actually Composable could work on day one. And then two is just evidence. Like you see some of the largest Fortune 500 companies in the world onboarding in less than 4 weeks. And when you see that, then it gives everyone else conviction too. Like now we compete somewhat with Salesforce's CDP. And we've just seen so many folks that were able to implement Hightouch in like 1/12th of the time. And then they tell all their friends that happened.
Yeah. And they can also try it out quickly if they want to, potentially.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. We were the only vendor doing POCs for the last like 3 years. Now that's changing, but for a while we were the only ones.
You might have added pressure to the market.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everyone wants to be able to do POCs. Okay, cool. So, Composable CDP, the value of it is clear. Right now, there's been a lot of discussion around AI decisioning. And so maybe I'll take a step back and I'll ask, what are the different ways in which AI is part of the Hightouch product today?
Yeah. So, I mean, let me kind of tell you what happened. So the product that we had built up until this point was a way for marketers to manually use their data to do more personalized marketing, which is great. That's exactly what marketers have wanted for a very long time. And it allows customers to receive a more personalized customer experience that's more relevant to them. So that's fantastic.
Let's actually take a step back. I want to hear, what does it look like for a marketer that now has access to all their data in their Composable CDP to create some custom campaign? Like, what needs to happen?
Yeah, so I think I learned this thing a long time ago, which I found really interesting. When you give marketers data, it's not just that they run like the campaign they wanted to run faster. It's that they try like hundreds of things because they have all these ideas in their head, right? Like maybe I should target people of this demographic, or maybe I should target people in this state differently than that state. But trying those things is so physically complex and executionally complex. They might only try like one variant rather than 50 variants. So the biggest unlock is that now when the marketer has tooling at their fingertips to do customer segmentation and like journey execution, self-serve, then they start playing around with data more and learning what do customers in New York buy that people in LA don't, and vice versa. And when they learn those things, then they start building marketing campaigns saying like, well, we know people in LA and New York have more budget. Let's give them higher priced items versus people in different cities. These are the learnings they have, followed by the campaign execution, followed by then like making an omni-channel. So make sure that we sell the same items across ads in our app as well as over email. And those are really the three things that change most fundamentally when people use Hightouch. And it's really just like unleashing the floodgates of now the marketer has data.
So you were going from, this was the manual way of doing things. And it's really helpful to learn that even just seeing exposure to the data is more generative in terms of the ideas and campaigns and the ability to send dice for marketers. So what does the AI component look like?
So what we've done is we've built a platform for businesses to create their own AI agents. And those AI agents will run marketing for the business and keep iterating on that marketing. So the marketing gets better and better. And what we mean by this is specifically choosing between campaigns that already exist. So we don't mean copy generation. We mean you already have copy and templates. Within those templates, you have to choose, what should I show the customer? Is it going to be about like bicycles, or is it going to be about bike helmets, for example? And to be able to decision what's most propensity on a one-to-one basis.
Is there a future where you believe that the campaigns themselves would also be done by the AI agents? Just, AI can be creative, it can generate content, and perhaps that's controversial, but I'm just curious if this is the start or if this is some fundamental belief on where AI should begin and end.
No, I think it will be in the future, but it requires a lot more like infrastructure to make that work. So it requires two things. One, it requires guardrails so that the creative that is generated is not unsafe for the user to see.
Yep.
And two is it requires good prompting. So like an LLM only knows as much about the customer as you tell it about the customer. So I think the hardest and most interesting challenge right now is how do I give that agent or that LLM as much context about both this customer as possible, as well as all customers globally.
Yeah.
Such that it has as much insight about my business rather than just the global consumer base.
Well, it sounds like in this case also, and the user that you're targeting.
Exactly.
So you want to be able to customize it to the user, but also make sure that you have the relevant language and, you're not saying anything that would be different from the brand voice and the brand identity. Cool. So right now, the way that it works is you have agents that are making decisions about which campaigns to surface for different users.
Yeah, maybe like let's stepping back. So like how the product works, right, is we help any individual consumer brand set up a reinforcement learning agent that will be able to optimize marketing for them. So imagine like there's one marketer for every consumer in the customer database. That's how the reinforcement learning agent operates. And it has access to every past action every customer has taken. So it learns on all customer history. Then it'll look at all past actions that individual consumer has taken to understand so far where, for example, Barr is in the customer journey. And then lastly, it has available to it all possible campaigns that it can run. So from the email system, the SMS system, and the push notification system, it'll see all the copy and creative that is available and determine based on all past actions, what is the best campaign to show this customer to optimize towards an outcome. And I think that's the most interesting. So you give the agent outcomes to optimize towards. You'll say things like, if anyone's ever bought one product from us, we want them to buy multiple products from us. Or if they bought one category, they should buy a second category.
Help me understand a little bit more about what's happening behind the scenes with these RL agents. So maybe we'll start with, why is using RL for these marketing agents the right paradigm?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, RL is uniquely suited because it's very good at understanding a sequence of events, both historical and future, that relates to a goal state. So marketers almost always want to optimize towards one thing, right? Which is LTV. How much transaction volume am I getting from this individual customer? LTV is not linear. It's not like I just want to increase conversion on this funnel. It's actually, I might want to get you to do many intermediate actions or show you many intermediate campaigns up until the point where you get to a goal state. And that goal state is a transaction state. So RL does a really good job of optimizing not just getting to the goal right now, but getting to the goal eventually through intermediate states.
This kind of leads to another question I had, which was, is there a very clear reward function for agents when when you're deploying them across a set of customers that have different goals, but maybe within marketing, you have similar things that you want to do, whether it's purchases or click-through. So maybe tell me a little bit about defining the reward functions for these agents.
Yeah, so that's exactly correct. In our UI, we let the marketer define the reward function. So we'll say like a click is worth this much, web browse session is worth this much, app download is worth this much, and then eventually purchase is worth this much. And we'll tie those together too. So we'll tie the propensities of like people that browse often buy, people that download app often browse, such that the rewards could be tied to each other as well.
How much do those vary by organization? Are you seeing vastly different reward functions across your set of customers for folks who are implementing AI decisioning? Or is it all kind of like an iterative game that roughly ends up with similar reward functions?
No, they are vastly different. And it is true that companies within certain verticals resemble each other, but even then they're still vastly different. And like oftentimes, like what our reward functions are encoding are things that the marketing team or the business team already knows to be true. So one really good example of this is pretty much every grocery store right now is optimizing for order ahead and order online. And they know that if you're an order ahead or an order online customer, that you're likely to buy all your groceries from that store every time, rather than through different stores each time.
Interesting.
And so this is something where typical RL would take like many, many iterations to learn this habit of the customer base. Marketers don't want to waste time having their RL algorithm learn something they already know. So they can encode this into their reward function or into their bias. And there's like many, many attributes like these that are specific to grocery or specific to travel, but then also slightly differ between different brands. Some brands are more low-cost brands. Other brands are like premium brands. And therefore, the journey just varies quite a bit.
So some of it you can like encode based on information that the business already knows to be true. And then a lot of it is learning on the data. I'm curious how you think, because I'm sure you have large customers, some of whom we've mentioned with a lot of data, and then you have smaller customers, the ability to both understand granularity of cohorts and to make that decision, I assume gets much better with data. So I'm curious how you think about like how much data you need to actually do this in a robust way.
Well, so I'll say two things here. The assumption is certainly correct. The more data you have, the better learning you'll be able to do, and better pre-training you'll be able to do. And therefore, the better the agent will be at having conclusions and running the marketing. But this is also the first time, I think, in our company's history and most marketing teams' histories, where actually like you don't need that much data. Because the agent by itself is going to do trial and error and generate more data. And it's going to learn along dimensions of your customer base without having to necessarily know about the customer base in advance. So like most marketing was deterministic, right? It was, if you fall into this condition, run this marketing. If you don't fall into this condition, don't run that marketing. Now it's actually based on experimentation, and the RL agent can experiment like hundreds of times an hour in order to get to a conclusion. So what actually matters way more than how much data you have is how much traffic you have. Because against that traffic, it can try new things, make new learnings, and then iterate.
Yeah. And then if you don't have sufficient traffic in order to get that number of experiments, well, A, you would have fewer people. So you'd have like a smaller and less diverse audience, but you would also potentially need to spam. I don't want to use the word spam, experiment with the same person multiple times, which may not be what the marketers want.
Which you wouldn't want to do exactly. So you put a rail against that. Yeah. And I think like one thing that's interesting is everyone thinks I need to get my data into perfect condition before I use AI. I think that's somewhat true for like certain generative use cases, but I think it's actually untrue here. Here, actually, what you need is exactly what you alluded to, which is a good reward function. So you need good feedback loop on what is working. Are people clicking on emails? Are they opening our emails? Are they buying? And if you have a good feedback loop on that in real time, then actually you can circumvent the need for like really, really good customer 360, for example.
You had mentioned that there is some variability across different customers and the reward functions they use. I'm curious if some customers come to you and they're like, I don't know how to set the reward function. Can you help me out? How much of it is this is really, really clear because we've been doing this rodeo manually and we have good intuition versus how much of it is there's this new paradigm of using AI agents and we need some guidance and understanding how do you set the objective function?
I think in 100% of cases, people want guidance on how to set the objective function. And moreover, they want to actually be able to iterate and change the objective function over time as they learn more and more themselves. So yeah, I mean, I think we make sure the platform is extremely flexible, so the objective function can be iterated on. But many times, I think like folks will come to us and we'll have a really good baseline understanding of what should be done, but we'll want to add more nuance like after the fact. So let me give you an example. I might want to, in the beginning, just optimize for transactions. So people that browse my website, I want to get them to buy. Good. Then I might actually bifurcate my agent into two agents. I might have an agent that's good at first purchase, and I might have a second agent that's good at second purchase. And I might goal these two agents differently. First agent might be better at giving discounts. The second agent that does second purchase might be less good at giving discounts and more good at looking at historical data and understanding the customer. So like eventually being able to create like multiple agents with multiple goals is where it gets really interesting. And all of our customers that use the AI decisioning product eventually end up doing this.
Maybe actually taking a step backwards, what are the key technical decisions that you need to do to enable the agents that we talked about or the multiple agents that we talked about? What did you have to build internally and who is the team that built that?
At Hightouch, right?
Yeah, at Hightouch.
Yeah. So we actually ended up building a whole new engineering team for this product. And the nature of that team was also pretty different. We hired some ML engineers, ML scientists, and then like restaffed a lot of our like distributed systems engineers onto this project as well. And it's led by Ernest, who was our first ever hire and first ever engineer. So he runs the team.
Can I just ask, it's a really competitive market to get ML talent. And this was not, you were not traditionally playing your very data-centric composable CDP platform, but this AI product is new. How do you get folks to follow you and kind of be devoted to building this new SKU, if you would call it that?
Yeah, I guess I have a take that hiring good talent is hard no matter what, regardless of whether it's ML talent or otherwise.
I think your take is right.
Yeah, and we're just like extremely picky as well. So, I mean, a few things. One is we have a single interview process. So you talk to us, it's like a 2-hour interview. Actually, sometimes it's less, sometimes it's 90 minutes. And if you pass the interview, you get a job.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's awesome.
It's been that way since the last like 5 years, yeah. And we're like, maybe we should advertise that more too, because I think engineers really like the idea of like decisiveness. And it's not a coding interview, there's an architecture interview. It's like a systems problem. That's one way. But the other way is Corey, who's our VP of engineering, he used to run the ML team at Opendoor. So like this is his wheelhouse. Reinforcement learning is also his wheelhouse. He is the right mentor on a lot of this stuff. Like sometimes he can train our backend engineers on these topics faster than it is to hire the next MLE. And so typically people join Hightouch because they are surrounded by like just some of the smartest developers so far that we've met.
Everyone I know on the team is incredible, and I didn't know that it was done in such a different hiring process, so that's an awesome fun fact. Okay, cool. So you've built up this ML team partially just because crack
Yeah.
engineers want Hightouch, and partially, you have some ML DNA that's been in the company actually for a long time, waiting for its moment. And so continue.
Yeah. So then the challenge is twofold. So one, we have built an abstract platform, right, that helps each individual brand we work with set up their own reinforcement learning agent. So everyone, technically, every brand using our platform actually is setting their own model that's running on their own data. And that challenge is pretty unique. So a lot of the time that we're spending is actually not on science. It's actually on how do we tract machine learning concepts into software such that it's repeatable and self-serve, and the next incremental customer can use it intuitively and set up agents that make sense for their business. So I think that's actually the challenge, and that's actually like what we are well suited to do as engineers too, as founders. And then the second is each of these models then needs to be tuned and like given feedback to appropriately work for that business case. So how PetSmart's model works is pretty different than how Whoop's model works. Whoop is the fitness band. They're trying to increase engagement. They just want you to exercise more. They know that if you exercise more, you'll do good things on their platform. PetSmart's pretty different. They know that they want people that have multiple pets to eventually onboard all their pets onto the PetSmart platform and get everything through PetSmart. So pretty different businesses, pretty different RL algorithm, same exact modules or like modularity when it comes to the software. And furthermore, it also like really well, it uses like all the IP that we've built in the past 5 years when it comes to marketing orchestration. So we're giving the agents the ability to orchestrate the marketing software that we've already built for the last 5 years. So we were able to skip a lot of development that way, but then the rest comes from like this kind of abstract platform that eventually builds a unique machine learning model for each one of our customer base.
What's the biggest challenge in doing that, in building this platform that has the unique ML model for each customer?
So this is the first product we build that's not deterministic software. Most software you build, you can test if it works and you can say with certainty that it works. This highly depends on like, how did you use it? What goal did you set? Is the copy and creative even good? And so on. And so there's a lot more testing that we have to do when it comes to incrementality, observability, holdouts, and so on, which we do provide our customers. So we make sure to have like really high certainty that the AI-driven marketing is working better than human-driven marketing and so on. And then the change management around actually like, we think you'll need just as many marketers, if not more, in the future. But those marketers will spend the time doing what they want to do, which is writing copy and creative. And machine learning will help decide which copy and creative applies to each customer.
So tell me a little bit about that. I am curious because it's already a challenging problem when you have any non-deterministic system. And then especially when you have multiple of these running across different customers. So how are you testing internally that these agents are working and they're working as intended? That's my first question. And then my second question related to that is, as a customer of Hightouch, what do I see and what do I, presumably I don't want to give you this information or tell you go make AI decisioning in a black box. So what is the exhaust that I see as a customer and what can I do with that?
Yeah, great question. So as customers, you actually see everything. There's not a single thing that our developers will do that is not going to be visible, because it's all going to be like, again, like tracked out into UIs and modules in our platform. And so you'll be able to see like, well, here's how we're tuning certain goals or like certain propensities. Here's how we're testing along certain dimensions and learning along those dimensions. So maybe we learned actually that city matters more than gender, or maybe we learned that past purchase category matters the most compared to the 3. So all learnings along all dimensions will show you both in the UI as well as right back to your data platform. And yeah, I think like the way to think of it is, it's exactly like our original platform, which was the Composable CDP. When we built Composable CDP, we built it without state. All state was held by the customer, and we would just write back to their state and read from their state. Something pretty similar here, where we are training the models on our side, but we're eventually writing back all the learnings, and all the data is still sitting with the customer. So it should be fully observable, fully like you get all the like toggles and knobs to change if you disagree with what the AI would have optimized for.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'd imagine customers really want that and really appreciate that. And so I'll ask two questions. Before the customers are observing that exhaust, how do you know that the agents are working as intended? That's one. And then two, when they do say, okay, I want to adjust this knob or something is not my expectation, what then happens? How do you learn and get better from that?
Yeah. So I think working as intended is actually not too difficult, but working is really difficult. We have good observability around like, did the agent do what it was supposed to do? And like, did these emails actually send? And did the agent actually run? And what decisions did it make? So it's like the delta between like, what does it try to do versus what does it actually achieve doing? Because sometimes the email system will say, no, we can't send this email and so on. So I think the observability around like working as intended is strong and like easy to like see. Then the harder thing is the one that you just mentioned, which is customer thinks they should do XYZ, but that actually might hurt the email program or the ad program. Or we think this will work, so let's try it as a hypothesis, but we were actually wrong. So how do you like build back the feedback loop of like, once the system realizes something is not performing, it turns that thing off. And maybe even alerts the customer that, hey, your program is not working, you should stop running it. So I think the good thing about RL is it'll automatically turn programs off if they're not working or not performant because of the feedback loop, right? So that's good. The harder thing is, how do we tell our marketers, hey, this program should be turned off and we're going to turn it off, but you should take a look at it and like diagnose it. I almost want there to be like tickets of like, here's what we learned. We stopped doing this, but you should read this in a human readable way and figure out why it didn't work.
Yeah, it's up to you to figure out.
Every marketing team we're talking to right now is like really, really hungry for that kind of knowledge of like, we tried this, it didn't work. Go take a look and tell me why.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that exhaust is so interesting because marketing teams also change in companies over time, but whether it's human or AI decisioning, and companies change over time too, right? Something that may not have worked in 2020 may work in 2025 or the reverse, but still having the history of these are our learnings is a really, really valuable playbook for anyone who's entering the organization or even just forgetting what they did 5 years ago.
100%. Yeah.
So you mentioned one thing, which is that customers are hungry for this ticketing system. I'm curious, what's next? Like, what would you add to the AI decisioning system?
Yeah, so much. I mean, we're very customer driven. Like, we'll focus mostly on like what customers actually want. But there's so many things already that they're asking for that make a lot of sense to us. So for example, arbitration between goals. Most brands don't just have one goal. They might have like multiple marketing teams or multiple brands within their umbrella that all want to market the customer. So how do you arbitrate between those? That's really interesting. Another is, can you create agents that actually observe our agents, that give feedback to our agents and improve? So instead of me having to go look at the data and say, hey, this didn't work or is working, can we actually create an observe, like a parent agent, potentially an LLM that will just consume all the exhaust and say, hey, I think you're missing a campaign for this cluster. Did you know that people over 65 always get to this point where they almost buy, but then they don't buy? You should write a campaign for them. Or did you know actually all this customer base is not buying for themselves, they're buying for their kids? You need a campaign for parents buying for kids. Like that kind of analysis is actually really possible now because we have good agents to like synthesize vast amounts of data. The missing link is that many of those agents are not seeing the copy and the creative. So the exhaust that we can show is not only here's the customer, here's everything we know about them, but also here's a visual image of every email and every web page the customer's seen. Now you tell me, LLM, what does this customer actually want to buy? So observing through like that kind of synthesis gets like extremely interesting, especially on a multimodal perspective. I don't think anyone's done that yet, but that will be V2.
Well, another thing that you said interesting inherent in there is this ability of setting up another cluster or another cohort. Right? You mentioned like the folks buying for their kids. And so I'm curious how much guidance people are looking for there. I've worked with marketing teams that do a lot of research and they end up with, here are 6 core personas that we're going after. Personas should be marketed to in these different ways. But in some ways, it's a qualitative process. And in many ways, it's like you can always divide the clusters to be smaller and more specific. And so how do you think about AI there, if at all?
Yeah, I think it's really useful for questioning the like 6 core personas and like subsetting one eventually, right? So like two ways. One, you might realize you have a 7th core persona that really matters. but it was in the data. It wasn't like easily intuitive. Second, you might realize you have all these high LTV customers that are actually, they look like one of the core personas, but they operate like a different one. So can I cluster you not based on your demographics, but actually based on your behavior? And I can't mention which brand, but there was one brand that recently told me about this. They were like, hey, look, most of our ICP is women from 20 to 35. But sometimes XYZ people operate like that, even though they are not in that demographic. So can I put you in the right ICP based on behavior rather than based on demographic?
Yep.
And give you the same email campaigns and campaigns I give that demographic because you're operating in that way.
Absolutely makes sense. And I want to make sure if there were other things you wanted to add to AI decisioning or the AI product that we got through all of them.
I mean, I think there's a lot. And the questions will be like, where is Hightouch best suited because we have the data versus like anyone else because maybe they're building LLMs or something. So one example is I do think marketers want a copilot to talk to in the flow of this. So just like you said, we have this cluster now. We've determined this cluster does not have good campaigns for them. What happens next? Does the marketer manually develop those campaigns, or does the marketer work with an LLM to develop those campaigns? Or is the LLM already there and proactively suggesting, here's what a campaign could look like. Do you agree, yes or no? So I think it gets really interesting on the edges. The way we talk about it internally is like, I want LLMs on the edges that will be producing copy and creative or ideas even based on the data generated. So based on the fact that there's low conversion or high conversion here, have one LLM observe and then another LLM create or ideate on like what should happen at the edges.
How do you see broadly like CDPs evolving as AI becomes more sophisticated? I read that your AI decisioning product is actually distinct from the composable CDP, so you can use other CDPs with AI decisioning. So why is that a decision that you made? And then where do you see CDPs going in the long term and evolving with all these changes in AI?
Yeah, so you're right. The AI decision product can work with any CDP you have today. It is a distinct product. Why did we build it that way? Because we want customers to get as much value as possible. So we are not sharp elbowed on like, who do you use as your CDP and so on. If folks want to build an AI agent that helps them with their marketing, they should be able to deploy one. And Hightouch should be able to help them regardless of like which warehouse you use or which CDP you use. So as a result, we've made it like a standalone product that can orchestrate your marketing regardless of your marketing stack. That's one. How will CDPs innovate or transform with more AI? I guess my short answer is I don't think they will that much. I can't think of that many CDPs right now that are doing things with AI outside of copilots.
I guess maybe the one thing I could think of is if you have unstructured data that you care about, maybe you can more easily just get that in a structured format or have some mix of structured, unstructured data in the CDP.
No, 100%. Yeah, I think that is something that we see a lot of customers doing. So for example, they'll have an LLM read all of their emails and tag the emails with topics as structured data, and then write the structured data into their CDP or their warehouse. I have not yet seen like CDPs build that kind of workflow, but I've seen customers build it for sure. I think a lot of companies right now in SaaS, the way they're innovating is they're trying to add LLMs into the workflow of their application as a text box. And it's like a workflow optimization. So it's like, this can build an audience for me or a journey for me. And I think that's cool. And I think that will actually potentially help marketers onboard quicker or like use the product more easily. But very few folks are thinking about like first principles. If I were to like start my company from scratch tomorrow, what would I build that would actually truly fundamentally change how marketing is done or how data is used? And when you ask that question, I think you get more to the conclusion of like building agents from scratch that use reinforcement learning and like operate marketing and like give feedback.
What do you think will remain uniquely human, given that we talked a little bit about agents verifying? You have the RL agents, and then you have the LLM that's potentially verifying or checking if something is missing, if they're doing the work correctly. We talked about LLMs at the edge, potentially experimenting with different content. And so what remains the marketer's job over time?
So certainly like brand, creative, copy, and so on. Many people hold this belief that actually like, sure, you can do all this experimentation, but if you just come up with the best brand messaging, like that will outperform everything. And I think on a broad basis, that is actually true. Most of like the best campaigns in the world have always been like something striking that like went viral. And then on the edges of that, things like abandoned cart, things like you've shopped before and you shop again, that's where data does a really good job. So I think marketers will still be responsible for like the creative and the copy. Where I'm not sure, and I'm actually really curious to get your take, is how good will the like observing agents be, the ones that synthesize all the data and come up with a conclusion? I'm not yet sure if like a human being will do a better job or an agent will do a better job. Intuitively, it could go either way. And we haven't yet seen agents succeed at that kind of workflow, but I think they might succeed or outperform human beings, but I'm not really sure.
Is this something you're actively experimenting with and trying to build today?
I guess short way to saying answering the question is we're experimenting with it for sure. But in order for a system like that to work, it needs to observe something. And so that's why we're focused first on building the agents that actually like produce the data. There's just too much inconsistency right now in how marketing is done.
Do you have any tips for marketers that, are considering using AI in some part of their workflow? Like, how do you stay abreast of everything that's changing?
It's a good question. I think like I have two tips. One tip is really important to think of AI as broader than LLMs. A lot of people have like reduced it to LLMs, and they have like hundreds of data scientists in their company that have built really good models. And those really good models are not like propagating to marketing, they're propagating to product. So I'd want to like decrease the friction of that and just make that easier. And I would encourage marketers to talk to their data scientists more and just like understand more what already exists and in the ML world. And then two is like finding the most useful but easy to operate use case. So typically for a business, this is, let me make sure everyone who's already bought something is getting the right marketing to buy a second thing. It's not something super, super difficult like their onboarding funnel. It's usually something post their onboarding funnel. So like finding like a easier to slice use case that's very clear ROI, running an agent on that use case or like some sort of like proof of concept on that use case, and then deciding like, should we do this more widely? So I think the issue is when people try to like automate everything all at once.
Yep.
It's really hard to do that, and it's really scary to do that. I'd much rather slice off like one critical use case, see if it works, and then do more.
Given that a lot of this AI functionality doesn't exist yet, how do you effectively slice off those use cases? Is it just deeply understanding customer problems and then having enough know-how to know how can AI solve those problems? Are you thinking broadly, what can AI do? And then finding those, like, what does the process look like of slicing problems in terms of their greatest impact? You guys are really good at this. You've always been good at this. I'm not surprised that in AI, you're also really good at it, but tips for those who want to learn from you.
Yeah, so actually I think marketers are really good at this too. Like if I'm a marketer, what you will probably see is that there's parts of the funnel that you feel are the least personalized or the most ready to optimize. Some brands, for example, tell us that sub 10% of our emails we send are personalized, and the other 90% are not personalized. That's like a really clear case of like, if we could just show the right SKUs at the top of the email, people will click more often, right? So that's like an easy slice. Usually marketers know what their easiest slices are, or like the areas for most personalization are. And then the question becomes the how. They're more curious in the execution rather than like what is the most useful use case. So I think that's like a good place for marketers to start. And I don't think I think when it comes to like understanding how AI works, like where it's the most useful, I don't think that's entirely necessary. I think a good approximation for this is, where do you have so much cardinality that it would be impossible to write a journey or like an execution for every like every thing in that cardinality. So like, especially for like e-commerce and retail, if you're selling like 6 categories of products with like 1,000 things in each category, cardinality is too high. Machine learning probably does a good job. So these are cases that I would slice off because you're not going to build a campaign for every case, and you'd rather like automate that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, and so I'm just going to end by asking you a personal question, which is, you got your ML Masters and you've been on this amazing journey. What are you most excited for right now in the future of AI and Hightouch?
Okay, so what I'm actually most excited about from a fundamental technology perspective is like agents talking to other agents. I think things get really interesting when you create systems of agents. Maybe one agent like surfaces information, another one consumes and synthesizes, and the third like runs the marketing and gives feedback. Like I think it gets extremely interesting because you get more reasoning.
Yep.
Like I think right now a lot of agents are like execution, and it's great that we have execution. But when you get to reasoning, and they're like teaching each other things and like iterating in isolation, things could get really, really interesting. The guardrails need to exist before that happens, but I think that's where like a lot of this can get like supercharged.
Yeah, and you alluded to a lot of this. You talked about like the LLM that can verify if things are working according to plan or if something is missing. I mean, in general, I know you all love modularity. So if you have agents that are focused on specific parts of the system that can communicate to each other and something, there's a parent agent overseeing it, could be really exciting.
Yeah. So I think that's on the more fundamental technology side. On the Hightouch side, what I'm excited about is the first time in history, and I think, where like someone can go and say, here's my goal. Here's all the things we could do to achieve that goal. Figure it out. Figure out this goal. Like this kind of like declarative form of marketing or outcome based form of marketing versus imperative and like function based is so interesting. And I think like there's like probably like years of development to like make this actually work. And like now I think it works actually today, but to make it work for like wider and wider use cases. And I think that's what excites me, because marketers have never been able to operate in that way before. And with this technology, they can.
That's awesome. Well, I'm really excited to continue following the journey of AI decisioning. And thanks so much for taking the time. It was a pleasure as always.
Thanks as well, Barr.